Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to join the conference. Thank you in particular to Ricardo and Nico for all the help. I was meant to be there with you in person, but unfortunately, we couldn't actually find the right sort of flight schedule from Brussels, so I truly apologize. I also really wanted to congratulate the speakers on the introduction panel because I thought it was one of the best panels I've tuned into for a very long time, and it certainly covered on all aspects that are currently not talked about in the EU policy landscape, moving from adaptation to the issue of democracy and the sort of democratic setting that's required, and Pigouvian economics. And so I've really, really enjoyed it. And I will try, therefore, to do my best to refer back to some of the very precious remarks that you've shared with us in the first panel. So maybe just to tell you a little bit about myself and then about Cleantech for Europe so that the presentation makes more sense. But I've been working in the EU climate policy space for the past 8 years. I have led various campaigns working for different NGOs, in particularly around reforming the EU ETS, so the EU's carbon market, and the European climate law, as well as currently working on a campaign around the Green Deal Industrial Plan, the STEP proposal. And so effectively for a year now working to support the EU in developing its response to the Inflation Reduction Act. Cleantech for Europe is actually a network of coalitions. And so a lot of the insights that I will share with you come from these coalitions. So we're working with a coalition of venture capital investors in climate technologies. So basically exactly what was mentioned in the previous panel, which is that ultimately we need to move towards the stage of getting technologies to reduce emissions. And by the way, these technologies exist, they just need to be scaled up. So that's exactly sort of what our coalitions are trying to support, the Venture Capital Coalition and the Scale Up Coalition. So trying to fill the legislative boxes that we've created, which, by the way, I think the legislation that the EU has created is indeed the very best in the world. Having said that, of course, there's gaps, and of course that we still need technologies to be deployed to reduce these emissions. Okay, done with the introduction. Happy to move on to the first panel. So the question was a little bit on EU policies, where are we, and sort of what's at stake at the moment. So very briefly, on the EU Green Deal, we see that we've already moved towards compliance. We're now moving into the compliance phase, and actually this week marks the first week of the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism coming into force. In other words, this is the week when EU climate policies have already gone global. Of course, it's the first phase of the scheme. Of course, there's many caveats to this. And of course, the compliance phase will open up a whole new chapter in EU climate policies because we're going to see, as it so happens in policy, where the design of the policy confronts the reality of implementing it. And so we're going to have some very interesting years ahead where, the data we're collecting through CBAM and other policy tools will inform us as to where we can improve what's been agreed under the EU Green Deal. Having said that, is it on time? No, it's far too late. So CBAM was already meant to perhaps come into force, if you recall, in the previous legislative cycle. So we had a vote on it in 2017 in the European Parliament, which effectively voted in a last-minute turn against CBAM, which meant that finally we have to implement it quite late in the game, right? This is also the year when we're very seriously talking about reaching 1.5 degrees already. So things are accelerating on the climate front, but we're still catching up on the policy landscape with these sort of years where effectively the progress on climate policy was sort of held back by very heavy industrial lobbying. So to be very clear on the question, can the green transition be pro-competitive and market-friendly? Well, first of all, the market itself is not a neutral entity. It's a social, economic, and political construction that so far has favored and has been designed and developed alongside the main incumbents or the main ways that we've been manufacturing goods and energy, producing energy and using it, since the Industrial Revolution. So we will have to fundamentally transform the market. But yes, we need it. We need markets to lower the prices of new technology, the costs of new technologies. At the same time, the market needs intervention. So we're exactly in that phase of the transition, and I find it to be a very fascinating juncture in time. Here is just a bit of a list of aspects that are important. There's another big window of the EU Green Deal coming up in 2026, 2027, when we're going to have this ETS2 starting up, which is going to affect sectors that we interact with daily. So there will be a direct link between citizens and the sort of carbon pricing. So transport, buildings, and therefore I think it's about to become quite personal. Um, and so it's interesting. And of course, the EU Green Deal has mostly focused on mitigation, rightfully so, because, as I've said, we've missed previous windows of acting on the climate emergency. So what this means is we had to do a lot really quickly, catching up. But we're a bit we have a blind spot left over the fact that Europe is the continent warming up the fastest, and that we need to start talking about adaptation tech as well as part of sort of our broader response to the climate crisis. And so my guess is there will be a EU Green Deal too of some sorts, and it will have to be focused on adaptation, not least because the phenomena we're dealing with is getting extremely serious and affecting our economies as well as our societies. So, what else is happening? We see a move towards the discourse on nature positive and kind of the idea of developing the net part of the net zero equation and maybe going even towards net negative. So there's that group of policies. Of course, there's a lot of interesting legislation unfolding in parallel on private sector transparency, which effectively asks for companies to report on scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And also checks on their sustainability claims. So we are checking market behavior in a way that we should have done so perhaps before, but in any case, the market as we've defined it in terms of a less fair sort of unregulated body, that won't necessarily look the same way. We'll have to be very tightly monitoring every single kind of source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so that's also changing. And finally, as of this year, we have a very interesting policy proposal, the Green Deal Industrial Plan, that I'll talk about in more detail a bit later. So, are these policies working? And now I will show you on the next slide.
Suzanne, you have 2 or 3 minutes left, so.
Okay, that's fine.
For the opening remarks, then of course you will have other.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said 10 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's time at 36.
That's perfect. That's not a problem at all. So let me then just finalize the opening remarks and to say we do see that the EU Green Deal has worked in the sense that in this study, what that we're looking at, we're using venture capital investments as a proxy for has the regulatory system increased the attractiveness of investments in Europe when it comes to technologies we need to design out CO2, reduce it, and so on. And so if you look at the past 4 years, the EU has actually increased in the amount of venture capital deals. So the investor landscape has responded positively to the EU policy development. So it's seen as a solid piece of work that we've put together. It's a solid proposition. And then finally, just the next slide is a comparison of where the EU and the US are in terms of their ambition on critical aspects of how to design a policy response to the climate emergency. So as you see, if we look at the green line, we see that Europe has gone at maximum ambition when it comes to enabling regulation, but it's still, let's say, at the lowest level of ambition when it comes to creating demand signals for the market for clean tech and net zero tech, which is the same category. We see the US has gone really far in demand signals and funding signals. So these are areas where the EU could go further. We also see that the US has gone further in terms of infrastructure. So for them, these are the three biggest pillars of the response, whereas for us, it's mostly been a regulatory approach only, nearly. And then finally, both entities are looking at supply chain measures and skills development. So I'm happy to stop here, and then we can, of course, continue the conversation later on. Thank you very much.